He closed the coffin himself. With his own hands, he placed the Bible on his wife's chest. The same Bible that had accompanied them through 47 years of marriage. And before the casket was sealed, he whispered, "If God existed, you would still be here." That night, he buried two things: the woman he loved, and his own faith. But 30 years later, a young man appeared at his farm gate holding that very same Bible. And he said something that brought the old man to his knees. There are promises that seem to die along with those we love. And there are wounds that time doesn't heal. It only silences. Today, you will hear a story about loss, faith, guilt, and redemption. A story that proves some things can be buried, but never forgotten. If you believe there are still stories capable of touching the heart and rekindling hope, subscribe now to the Moments That Matter channel. Here, every story has a purpose. And I need to ask you something important. Stay until the end. Because what was hidden inside that Bible will change everything. Now, take a deep breath. And let's begin. The wind that morning felt heavier. Thomas Whitaker didn't cry. He couldn't. He stood motionless beside the simple wooden coffin, looking at the serene face of Margaret, his wife of nearly 5 decades. She always said God had a plan. But what plan included tearing a good woman from the world like that? The pastor spoke of reunions, eternity, and hope. Thomas heard nothing. Only the sound of dirt falling onto the casket. Every shovelful of earth felt like a sentence. When everyone left, he remained. He opened the old brown leather Bible, the same one Margaret read every night. There were notes in the margins. Underlined verses. Small dates written in her delicate handwriting. He closed the book firmly. "You believed in this so much." Then, in an impulse fueled by pain and revolt, he placed the Bible on the coffin before it was completely covered. If God wanted to take her, let him take her faith too. That afternoon, Thomas returned home alone. And he never stepped foot in a church again. The farm aged along with him. The fences broke, and he fixed them. The roof leaked, and he repaired it. The seasons passed. But inside him, nothing changed. The house remained almost untouched since the day Margaret died. Her apron was still hanging behind the door. The garden flowers died, and he never planted others. He avoided the cemetery. Avoiding the cemetery meant avoiding the memory of what he had done. Sometimes at night, he would sit on the porch and look at the sky. Not to pray, but to challenge. If you are real, why did you stay silent? No answer came. Faith was replaced by routine. Hope by stubbornness. The neighbors said he had hardened. But the truth was different. He wasn't hardened. He was broken. And when something breaks on the inside, it makes less noise than it should. It was late afternoon when the dog started barking. Thomas slowly rose from his rocking chair and walked to the gate. A young man was standing there. He couldn't have been more than his early 20s. He wore worn-out boots, simple jeans, and held something against his chest. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Can I help you?" The young man took a deep breath. His eyes were red, as if he had been up all night. Then he held up the object. An old Bible. Brown cover. Worn at the edges. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. He knew that mark on the spine. He knew every scratch. It was impossible. "Where did you get that?" His voice trembled. The young man swallowed hard. "Sir, did this belong to Margaret Whitaker?" The world seemed to stop. The wind ceased. The past, which he had tried to bury for 30 years, had just knocked on his door. And it wasn't even the hardest part yet. Thomas opened the gate slowly, as if any sudden movement could make the scene disappear. He took the Bible with trembling hands. It was the one. The small coffee stain at the bottom. The dog-eared corner on Psalm 23. Margaret's delicate handwriting in the margins. "This was buried," he whispered. The young man nodded. "I know. The silence between them was too heavy. "My name is Daniel. I work in maintenance at the cemetery in the next town over." Thomas felt his stomach go cold. Daniel continued, "3 months ago, a heavy storm hit the region. An old tree fell and damaged part of the ground where your wife is buried. The air seemed to leave his lungs. When we went to repair the soil, we found this." Thomas closed his eyes. 30 years of silence, and now the earth was returning what he had tried to entomb. But Daniel wasn't finished. "I didn't bring it back just for that." Thomas opened his eyes slowly. "Then why?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Because there is something inside it that you never saw." They went inside the house. Thomas placed the Bible on the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret used to read every night. Daniel opened the book carefully. Between the pages of the Gospel of John was an old envelope, yellowed by time. The name written on the front made Thomas's heart race. "To my beloved Thomas." The handwriting was unmistakable. His hands began to shake. "I never saw this. She probably put it there shortly before," Daniel replied softly. Thomas opened the envelope with difficulty. Inside, a folded letter. He began to read. "My love, if you are reading this, it is because God found a way to return what you tried to surrender to pain." The words became blurred by the tears that finally came. She knew. She knew he would be angry. She knew he would question his faith. "I know your heart. And I know that when the sadness passes, you will realize that God didn't take me. He just called me sooner." Thomas stopped reading. The weight of 30 years began to crack. Thomas continued reading, his voice failing him. "Do not blame heaven for what you do not understand. Do not turn your pain into a wall. Turn it into a bridge." Every sentence seemed to bridge decades. "If one day this Bible returns to your hands, it will be because God answered a prayer of mine." He looked up. A prayer. Daniel watched him in silence. Thomas went back to the letter. "I asked that when you were ready, someone would bring this Bible back, not to remind you of my death, but to remind you of our faith." The room fell into absolute silence. The faith he believed he had buried was alive on that paper. He took a deep breath for the first time in many years. "Why did you bring it personally?" he asked Daniel. The young man hesitated, his eyes filled with tears. "Because it wasn't a coincidence that I found it." Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean by that?" Daniel pressed his lips together. "I need to tell you something about my mother." Daniel sat down slowly. "My mother's name was Margaret too." Thomas's heart nearly stopped. "She worked here on the farm when she was young, before I was born." Thomas tried to remember. There was a girl who helped Margaret in the garden many years ago. Quiet, gentle. She always spoke of your wife. She said she learned to have faith by watching the way Margaret prayed. Daniel took a deep breath. "My mother got pregnant very young. My father left. She almost gave up on me." His voice broke. "But she told me your wife visited her one night. They prayed together. And Margaret said God had a purpose for that baby." Thomas felt the world spin. "I am that baby." The silence was absolute. "My mother passed away last year. Before she died, she asked me to work at the cemetery in the area where Margaret was buried." Thomas couldn't speak. Daniel continued. "She said one day I would understand why." He pointed to the Bible on the table. "I think today I understand." Thomas held the book against his chest. Maybe, just maybe, faith had never been buried. Thomas stood up slowly and walked to the window. The sunset painted the sky in orange and gold, exactly like that afternoon he buried Margaret. 30 years. 30 years of blaming heaven. 30 years of living as if he were being punished. He hugged the Bible to his chest and felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Shame. Shame for having abandoned what she loved so much. Shame for letting pride speak louder than love. I was unfair, he whispered. Daniel remained silent, respecting the moment. Thomas turned to him. I said horrible things to God that day. Daniel replied softly. Maybe he was just waiting for you to finish talking. Thomas let out a small laugh, his first sincere one in many years. He went back to the table and opened the letter again. At the end, there was a sentence he hadn't been able to read before because of the tears. When you open your heart again, plant flowers in the garden. I always loved flowers. He closed his eyes. Maybe there was still time. Maybe the silence had never been absence. Maybe it was just patience. The next morning, something different happened. Thomas woke up before sunrise. Not from insomnia, but by choice. He went out to the garden, the one that had remained dry and forgotten for 3 decades. The earth was hard. Like him. Daniel appeared with a hoe in his hands. Do you need help? Thomas looked at the young man and nodded. The two began to dig. Every shovelful of dirt seemed to break not just the soil, but old layers of bitterness. As they worked, Thomas spoke about Margaret for the first time without pain, only with longing. He spoke of her laughter, her whispered prayers before bed, the way she believed in people. Daniel listened to it all. By late afternoon, small seedlings were planted. Thomas looked at the sky, not challenging, not accusing, but thanking. I took my time, but I'm back. The wind blew softly. And for the first time in 30 years, he didn't feel silence. He felt peace. Days later, Thomas returned to the cemetery. This time, not to run away, but to stay. He knelt before Margaret's grave. He placed the Bible on the headstone for a few moments. I thought I had buried our faith along with you. He took a deep breath. But you were right. God found a way. He looked at Daniel, who stood a few steps behind him. A young man who only existed because his wife chose to believe. A prayer made decades ago, answered at the right time. Thomas opened the Bible and read Psalm 23 aloud, the very one that was marked. His voice no longer trembled. When he finished, he closed the book and smiled. He hadn't lost everything. Pain didn't win. Faith didn't die. It only waited. Because some promises don't stay buried, they bloom. There are moments in life when it seems God has gone silent. Moments when we bury dreams, faith, and hope along with our losses. But maybe heaven isn't silent. Maybe it's preparing the right moment to return what we thought we had lost. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment saying, "Some promises bloom." I want to hear from you. And if you believe that stories like this can still transform lives, subscribe now to Moments That Matter. Here, every story is a reminder that faith can wait, but it never dies. See you in the next story.